Hey friends, this is Pastor Joe from Southwest Lutheran Church, and I have another devotion based on our Bible study series on diversity, race, and racism. Now, last week we talked about two unhelpful ways to address the reality of race and diversity in the world. We talked about segregation, which separates people, and assimilationism, which kind of makes them all the same. And we said neither of these is a good way to honor both the diversity that God has created us with and the unity that we are called to have in Jesus Christ all at the same time. So today we're thinking about another idea that in a way it's kind of a break, but it feels like a very important part of this whole conversation on diversity and being diverse communities. And what we're going to call this is ministry from the margins. Now, as part of this Bible study, we focused on the letter of 1 Peter, chapter 2, verses 9 to 25, and I won't read the whole thing, but this is kind of a section where the Apostle Peter is teaching on how to live your lives as Christians when you aren't in control of the society. How do we minister faithfully when we don't have all of the cultural sway, when we don't get our way, when the culture doesn't support the church, but even is indifferent or even opposes the church? Well, there's something really interesting to think about. And I'm going to read, this is 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, and I'm going to jump down a little bit further. But this is actually a really challenging passage often, and I think this is a helpful way to think about it. So, 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 18, the apostle says, "Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God." He continues, "But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." Now, I know that's a really difficult passage for many people, right? Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters. But what the apostle is saying here is that we as Christians should not expect to be in control of society. In fact, being faithful to the Lord, he says, we should expect to be rejected by society. We should expect to be treated unjustly. And this is why the apostle says, if you do good regardless, and you suffer for doing good, then you're being just like Jesus, who also did only good, and yet he was unjustly persecuted, and yet he was righteous. So, what do we do with this? Well, I think that one of the really good things for us to think about is that for most Christians today, like me, and when I say that, I'm talking about people, I'm a white Christian living in suburban America. We have the benefit of many, many years, centuries of what we call Christendom, right? This period of time when the church was really in control of society, starting from the 300s, 400s AD in the Roman Empire, all the way up through the 1900s in America. We had a time when we, the church, people like me, we were kind of in charge. We really were in charge, and our voices were listened to. We got our way when there were questions and debates, all sorts of stuff. That's not the natural home for the church. The Apostle Peter, and we know these stories from the book of Acts. We know the stories of the Apostle Paul and his persecutions. The Apostle Peter seems to think that our more natural state is to be doing our best to live godly lives even in the midst of pagan societies. And I guess you can argue over whether that's our natural state or not, but that's the context that the apostle is writing to. And here he's using the example of a slave, right? That person who is most mistreated, that person who is kind of on the bottom rung of society. If you live righteously even still, then you are following in the footsteps of Christ. Now, I fully affirm the Bible does not approve of slavery, ain't a good thing. But that's not really what's in view here. What's in view here is the apostle teaching us that we ought to be living in a righteous way. We ought to be doing good. We ought to be blessing our neighbor. Even if we are slaves, we ought to be blessing our master. Because when we live this way, we are imitating the example of Christ. Now, I said at the beginning, we're talking about ministry from the margin. Well, what's this mean for us today? It means that for us as Christians today, if we want to look for examples of faithfulness, and if we want to imitate those examples of faithfulness, we actually do best to look to people who aren't at the center of society. There's this weird thing that happens. When the church is at the center of society, then we get kind of mixed up. We start to focus our energies on institutional preservation and passing the right kind of laws and preserving the influence of Christianity in society, and we end up doing all these things, and none of that is really about sharing the gospel and showing people what a Christian life really looks like, which is humble self-sacrifice that comes from servant love. There's a danger for us, a real danger for us, a spiritual danger that comes with being at the center of society. And it's not that there aren't spiritual dangers at the margin of society, but I think what the apostle is showing us here is that those who are persecuted and those who are on the outside, those who aren't at the center of society, I think we need to take a look at them and recognize that being at the center of society doesn't really count for anything in God's kingdom. In God's kingdom, what matters is faithfulness. And those who are faithful and those who do good and live righteous lives, even suffering for it, they are the ones who are truly imitating Christ. What that means for us today is let's look to those people on the margins of society as the ones who can help us find the way forward. I mean, after all, I said, it's up through the 1900s in America that we had this Christian-centered culture. That's really gone away. It's going away. Some places it's still pretty strong in America, but a lot it's just gone, right? And the way all the trends are going is the culture is becoming less and less Christian-focused. That's just the way things are. So for us as the people of God, who can lead the way? Well, it's those people who already have experience not living in a Christian society that's focused on me, right? So I really believe we need to do some work in raising up, say, immigrants and refugees as leaders for the church. Giving respect and honor and listening to voices who historically have been on the margin of the white centered church in America, right? When we listen to these folks, they're not stepping forward into unfamiliar territory. Folks who have already been on the margins can teach us how to live faithfully as the people of God on the margins today. I hope we listen to them. So that's what I have to say. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you have questions? Do you have comments? Throw them in the comments below. I'd love to have a conversation. So until next time, take care and God bless.